I walked into the house and there was no baby. No soft cry, no tiny blanket tossed over a chair, just floors and the kind of quiet that makes your stomach drop. I was still carrying a silver rattle and a cashmere blanket I'd bought between flights, silly gifts for a little girl I'd promised myself I would show up for. My son wouldn't meet my eyes. His wife's smile looked ironed flat. They ushered me to a formal room instead of the family one, as if comfort itself were off limits. Then the words came measured, practiced colder than the mantle adoption. Closed nothing to discuss. I heard damaged, unacceptable, a mistake they'd corrected. I have buried a husband, I have survived lonely nights in hotels. But this was different. This was a door slammed on blood. I stood there with my useless presence and understood if love was going to speak for that child, it would have to be me. In a Berlin hotel business center, my son's name lit my phone. Labor hours, not days. The calendar's blocks rehearsal meetings, a keynote faded behind one image, a tiny hand around my finger. I promised I'd come. He reminded me of the conference. I said as soon as I could shut the laptop and booked home, heart ticking like a second clock. I still gave the keynote. My word matters. Glass roof, bright lights, applause like a tide I hadn't asked for. In the green room, a photo arrived, dark hair, wrinkled brow button mouth. I wrote back, I'm coming. Give me 4 days. It will still count. At JFK with a neck pillow of regret, I drove north with a bag of talismans, a silver rattle, a cashmere blanket, a stuffed lamb. I pictured the first weight of her. At Round Hill Road, I whispered a grandmother's prayer. The gate accepted my code. The black-shuttered house waited as if nothing had changed. Inside, the air held its breath. He opened the door before I could knock, and his face looked wrong for a new father. No glow, just exhaustion, edged with something practiced. He led me not to the family room, but to the formal one, the room that smelled faintly of polish and old money. The room where people posed and did not live. His wife arrived in silk and control. They sat together like a photograph. I stayed standing because sitting felt like surrender. He started with pleasantries and thank yous I could not hear. Then he said the word, the coldest word in the English language when you are expecting joy adoption. I asked where. He said it was closed. I asked when. He said 5 days ago. I asked why. He did not answer. Somewhere in the story, my name fell away, and I became a problem to manage. The rattle bag slipped from my wrist and folded itself on the carpet, like a small, stunned animal left behind. Silence did the rest of their talking. She took the next line smooth, as if she had practiced into a mirror, the hospital screening the retest the result. Then the sentence that scraped the paint from my bones, a deaf baby is a damaged child. She said it like a conclusion reached by sensible people. A household policy about throw pillows, nothing personal. I felt my hands begin to shake, so I pressed them flat against my thighs and watched my knuckles whiten. I asked if any specialist had been called, if anyone had considered language access community a different map for a different child. She smiled a thin smile and said her family would not accept a defective grandchild. The word hung there like smoke that wouldn't dissipate. My son looked at his shoes because the ceiling was no help. I thought of lullabies you sign, of schools where silence is not absence, but culture of futures that require new rooms, not locked doors. I thought then of leaving before I broke something expensive, or myself. When I demanded the agency's name, he quoted a lawyer, the kind who speaks in phrases like policy and privacy and best interests. Closed adoption meant their decision, sealed the file, and the courts would honor the seal over my open hands. I had no standing, no claim, no foothold that wasn't slippery with someone else's authority. I tried every door in that immaculate house and found they were all decorative. I told them I would adopt her myself. He said grandparents don't qualify. I told them I would petition. He said there was nothing to petition. It was already done. The gifts on the floor looked foolish in a room built for verdicts. I gathered them anyway because love is sometimes nothing but the willingness to carry what others dropped. I walked to the car on legs that did not feel like mine, hearing their sentences repeat in my head, a cold, organized chorus, no rights, no name, no child. I drove nowhere, then somewhere, just to breathe again. In the hotel off the highway, beige art pretending to be calm, I opened my laptop and typed like a woman who had run out of acceptable options. Private investigators near Greenwich, ratings, retainers, disclaimers. I sent 3 emails and a plea that didn't sound like one. Then I searched American Sign Language classes within 20 miles. A beginner section at the library met Tuesday and Thursday evenings. I registered paid and reread the confirmation until the screen blurred. I called my office in London and asked Paige to hold the fort, to pay vendors to tell anyone who asked that I was where I needed to be. After hanging up, I sat very still and watched the room hold its breath. If the law said I had no voice here, I would grow new hands that could speak. I would build a bridge across their refusal plank by stubborn plank and walk toward the child they had named unacceptable. I would not quit before dawn found me in Connecticut. Sleep ignored me, so I lay there cataloging vows. I couldn't change what they had done, but I could decide who I would be next. I pictured a little girl growing up in a world that mostly forgot to make space for her. I pictured birthdays without a grandmother, teachers who didn't sign, doctors who addressed the wall. The thought lit a small, useful anger. If I could not reach her now, I could prepare for when I did. I would learn the shape of every letter and the grammar of her laughter. I would make my hands bilingual in love. I whispered it into the hotel dark like a sacrament. When you see me, you will see someone who expected you, who made room, who learned your language so you wouldn't have to translate your worth. I set my alarm for morning and finally let my aching body be heavy enough to hold me in place. Outside, sirens braided the night into thin. I slept between prayers and plans. In the morning, I bought a paper map from a bookstore, the kind you fold wrong 3 times before it agrees to lie flat. I taped it to the bedroom wall over the desk and opened a new box of pushpins. First, the red pin for Greenwich, for the hospital bracelet I never touched for the lobby where I should have learned her weight. I stepped back and stared at the lone pin glowing like a warning light. Then I made a legend in the corner red, for agencies blue, for orphanages green, for schools, and programs that might remember a file, a face, a baby who failed a hearing screen. The room changed as I wrote. Purpose rearranged the air. I understood I was building a trail where none would be offered. I made coffee, typed a list of addresses, and added mileage like prayer beads. On the way out, I touched the red pin and told it I was coming. Wait for me, little light on paper. I'm persistent. London kept time without me, because cities do. Paige sent me tidy updates, invoices, paid, tenants, reassured, a contractor arguing about tile that could wait forever. I answered at dawn and dusk, grateful for competence I didn't deserve, and spent the middle of the day driving to addresses. Strangers would refuse to confirm. I rented a small apartment near the water, a place with thin carpets and decent light, the kind of temporary home that understands its role in a story. I bought a second-hand kettle, 2 mugs, a notebook, and a pen that didn't scratch. My suitcase lived open on the chair like a pet that refused to settle. Every afternoon, I returned to the wall and added notes in ink arrows between counties, acronyms I was learning, IFSP, IEP, ADA. It felt like learning a new country inside my own. At night, I practiced the alphabet and told myself this was what devotion looked like on ordinary Tuesdays. Loneliness came, sat down, and learned patience too beside me. The library room smelled like dry erase markers and courage. 12 of us sat in a circle while a woman with quick eyes and patient hands introduced herself as Kara. She didn't speak. She signed, and an interpreter voiced for those of us not yet literate. Kara taught us how to get attention without sound, how to let our faces carry grammar, how to stay in the light so people could read us. When one woman automatically reached to tap a shoulder, Kara gently caught her wrist and showed another way. Mistakes were not scolded, they were invitations. Near the end of that first hour, Kara pointed to her forearm and signed a rhythm practice every day. The interpreter smiled, but we didn't need the voice. The meaning landed. Repetition would be the bridge. Outside, I sat in my car and traced the alphabet on the steering wheel, a secret I was learning to keep with both hands. I promised the wheel I'd be back tomorrow and the next day. At home, I drilled the alphabet until my knuckles ached, whispering letters under my breath, even though Kara preferred silence. A was a fist B, a palm C, the easy curve I loved. Then came G and H, the traitor's two fingers arguing about direction, collapsing into clumsy shapes whenever I needed grace. I taped little reminders around the apartment. Fridge lamp mirror door. I signed in grocery lines, in parking lots, in elevators. Careful with strangers, determined with myself. Some nights I cried from embarrassment nobody saw. Some mornings I woke with my hands already moving, as if muscle memory had crept in while I slept, and rearranged the furniture. When frustration surged, I pictured a girl reading my hands like a book meant for her alone. I pictured her answering not with apologies or effortful sound, but with language. I kept going. I let the stubborn letters teach me humility, and I kept going. Every stumble was tuition. Every repetition proof hope could be trained into muscle, into faith. At the cafe in Stamford, the barista never yelled names. People watched for a hand wave, a raised brow, a friendly flicker of light. I stood in line rehearsing the alphabet against my coat, trying to keep my face alive the way Kara had shown us. A small group occupied the corner table, hands moving like quick birds pausing for laughter that arrived without sound but with full-body warmth. I felt clumsy, too old, too late. But I ordered tea and took the chair nearest the window anyway. When someone signed hello, I answered slowly, fingers stiff with the kind of fear that pretends to be politeness. They waited. They gave me time. An older gentleman pointed to his chest, signed his name, then touched his heart and signed welcome. I signed mine back, grateful for a grammar that let sincerity outrun perfection. By the second cup, I was copying their pacing, nodding more talking, less practicing presence. Silence began to feel like a room that could hold us all. They taught me rules that felt like respect disguised as magic. Before speaking with your hands, catch the eyes. If you cannot use a small wave, a foot tap on the floor, a gentle flash of light. Do not grab a shoulder. Do not shout a name and expect the air to carry duty. Stand where light finds your face. Move your mouth, or do not, but pick one. Mixed signals scramble meaning. Stories belong to the hands and the eyebrows equally. Finish what you start. Be clear when you leave a conversation, because disappearing can feel like abandonment. I learned that lateness in a hearing world is rudeness. Lateness in a signing world is missed information. I learned to wait my turn, to widen my facial questions, to point without apology. The community did not owe me patience, yet they offered it like bread. In return, I offered attention simple. Day by day, my shoulders softened, my gaze steadied, and my hands stopped whispering. They began to mean clearly. The first investigator wore a suit that tried too hard and a smile that did the same. He took notes while I poured out dates. Hospital names, the 5-day window, the word closed, said like a slammed lid. He nodded often, promised discretion. Quoted a retainer that made me feel both hopeful and foolish. Weeks passed. He sent updates written in lawyer fog, ongoing inquiries, limited cooperation, respect for privacy statutes. I sent him cookies for his office and lists he didn't ask for. He billed hours like a metronome. Then one gray morning, he called from his car and delivered the line. People use when they want to sound kind and be done. The trail is too cold. He recommended I move on, possibly consider therapy. Certainly let the professionals handle future attempts. I hung up and stared at the red pin on my wall, the single steady star in a sky of no. I wanted to throw my phone, then I wanted to hire someone who wouldn't flinch. I found another the same afternoon, a woman with careful eyes who had been a nurse before she learned to read silence in paperwork. She asked sharper questions. She returned calls at midnight. She put on sneakers instead of confidence and knocked on doors that liked to stay shut. For a while, hope stretched its legs. She traced a temporary foster record that evaporated after a month. A caseworker who had moved to Arizona, a supervisor who remembered a file without names. Every thread dissolved into statute and dust. She lasted 8 months, then handed me a report that looked final because the cover said comprehensive. I thanked her and kept her card as if gratitude could turn into answers. The third arrived with less theater. He was blunt about fees and boundaries allergic to promising. He warned me that privacy law is a sturdy wall. I told him some walls have gates, you just need the right map. He said he would walk until the map ended for me. Agencies received me with lobby smiles and conference rooms that smelled like carpet cleaner and caution. I brought only the facts. A baby girl born in Greenwich, 5 days old at relinquishment. Newborn hearing screen failed twice. I left out the fury because it never helped. Directors explained policy in voices that sounded apologetic until the word cannot arrived. Closed adoptions protect everyone, they said, meaning everyone but the child and the grandmother who could not stop counting days. They pointed to state law, to the principle of finality, to the importance of not undermining placements. I nodded like a woman who understood mercy while memorizing the exit. Sometimes a receptionist would slip me a number for a different office, a different county, a different hope. I made the calls and listened to the same explanations dressed in new sweaters. Privacy wore many names and all of them locked. I pressed my palms together under the table and prayed without words for one hinge to loosen, just once please today. I met Rita at a book club where the stories were told out loud and on the air between us hands. Painting paragraphs while voices took breath. She taught at a school in Hartford wearing earrings. I liked her because she watched faces the way a gardener watches weather. Over coffee, she asked about my search, and I answered in the language I had clumsy but earnest stitching together signs with too much English showing at the seams. I told her the numbers first because numbers felt safer. 5 days, 12 months, 2 investigators, 1 promise. I told her about the word defective and how it had tried to stick to my granddaughter like a label that refuses to peel. Rita did not interrupt. She corrected one sign gently, then another, as if moving furniture to make a room kinder. When I finished, she tapped the table twice, thinking. She said she would ask around and warned me not to hold my breath. I said I had learned to breathe. Rita asked her colleagues, then friends, at programs I had never heard of, then a retired audiologist who still volunteered at weekend screenings. The answer came back as a chorus of maybes that resolved into no. A baby with that profile would have stood out, someone said, and then admitted that files blur when staff turnover spins fast. A placement might have started and failed. A foster parent might have moved. A name could have been changed twice. My chest learned a new ache, dull and disciplined, the ache of running without forward motion. I wrote thank you notes anyway, because gratitude kept me from calcifying. I kept a list titled Rumors I Cannot Prove and read it like a psalm before bed. I drank water, ate soup, and pretended I slept. In the morning, I put on clean jeans and hope both of which stretched enough to meet the day. No was not an answer I could work with. It was just a station between trains. I kept moving anyway. The wall became a living thing. Red pins marked agencies that told me no blue pins tracked orphanages that offered tours, and nothing else green pins lit up schools, and programs where someone might remember a small face with serious eyes. I strung cotton thread between clusters until counties became constellations. Next to the map, I taped a calendar and penciled routes with mileage gas stops and the name of the person I hoped to meet. I wrote debriefs after every visit, even when all I carried home was a pamphlet and a headache. The apartment looked like an incident room from television, but it felt more like a chapel. I stood there with my coffee and recited the legend. Red, blue, green, find. When I pulled a pin, I told the whole to heal. When I added one, I laid my palm against the paper, asking for direction. People talk about losing the plot. I was building one sturdy enough to hold a reunion. I refused to file despair. On rain days, the interstate turned into a long mirror. Slick and ill-tempered, reflecting a sky that would not make up its mind. Wipers kept time while trucks hurled spray across my windshield, and I thought about sanity, the way you think about tire pressure. Check it, adjust it, keep moving. Was I chasing smoke, or was I finally the woman my granddaughter needed? Stubborn enough to outweight a system designed for endings. I counted exit signs and said her name in my head. Not the one strangers had assigned her, but the one I carried like a tucked-away lullaby. I pulled into rest areas and stretched beside vending machines that hummed like restless bees. I kept snacks in the glove box and spare hope in the cup holder. Skepticism rode shotgun, but so did faith. Under the noise, a quiet kept repeating itself. Even if this is impossible, try. Wind rattled the car, and I steadied my hands on the wheel, choosing forward again. Because love prefers motion always. By year 5, the pins glowed like a rash across 3 states. I knew which office chairs squeaked, which elevators stuck between floors, which receptionists had the softest eyes. I brought muffins on Fridays and gratitude on Mondays. I also brought my stamina, which had started to wobble. One afternoon in Albany, after another tour of a corridor, filled with children who were not mine, I sat in the car and placed my forehead against the wheel. The sob came out of me like something buried under snow that met spring. I let it. I let the failure, the fear, the stubbornness of it all rinse my ribs. When it passed, I counted 5 breaths and wiped my face with napkins that smelled like glove box. I checked my list, drew a line through Albany, and wrote next to it, "Not here." Then I texted Paige a thumbs up so she would not worry. The engine turned over, the map in my head reassembled. I drove toward the next, maybe steadily. Somewhere along the line, people began to recognize me. At meetups and workshops, at school fairs and captioned film nights, someone would nudge a friend and sign, "That is the grandmother who never stopped looking." The name stuck like a worn medal I had not earned and did not refuse. It opened small doors. A program director returned my call faster. A volunteer searched an older database that was not quite official. A parent remembered a rumor about a baby who might have been moved across state lines. None of it turned into proof, but all of it kept breath moving through my story. I learned to accept casseroles from strangers and to bring extra chairs to potlucks because families multiply. I learned to tell the short version and to save the long one for people who had time. When the nickname reached me from someone I had never met, I let it land. If stubborn love needed a public uniform, I could wear it with quiet, grateful resolve today. By year 10, my hands were fluent enough to dream in signs. I still tripped over fast conversations, still missed a joke now and then, but language no longer felt like a locked door. It felt like a porch light. My map had grown crowded, and my notebook fat with dates, initials, acronyms, reminders to be kinder to myself. Seasons had turned and turned again. I had watched children I met at camps grow into teenagers who rolled their eyes at everything, which meant they were safe. I had watched new parents arrive, fragile, and leave practical carrying visual baby monitors and lists of questions. I kept asking my own, "Have you heard of a baby girl?" Connecticut 5 days failed hearing screen. I asked it gently, as if the question itself might be tired. Some days the only progress was that I did not quit. Other days I thought I saw the shape of a door in the wall. I waited, but not idly. Waiting for me meant motion. The call came on a Tuesday morning while I was labeling pins. A new voice introduced herself as Lauren, a social worker in Richmond, Virginia. She said my name like a question, then like an answer. Someone in the deaf community had mentioned me, the grandmother who never stopped looking. She hesitated, then said there was a girl at her orphanage. 12 years old deaf, placed as an infant, records thin. I stood so quickly my chair scraped the floor. Richmond was 6 hours if traffic behaved 8 if it sulked. I asked for anything she could tell me. She read a few lines, female, no confirmed birth name. Arrived around 6 months old after a failed foster placement. The note said born in Connecticut. The room tilted. Lauren said she didn't want to raise hope that would hurt when it fell, but she also didn't want to ignore a bell that knew me. I told her bells had been ringing 10 years. I told her I was halfway there already. Richmond lived on the far side of every red light between me and a possibility. I threw clothes into a tote, grabbed the folder that held my photos and notes, and left before sense could vote. The highway unwound like a dare. I ate gas station almonds and drank coffee that tasted like determination. I rehearsed questions in my head so I wouldn't waste a minute when I arrived. Who signed with her? What name did she answer to? Had anyone checked her hearing beyond the screen? Did she have friends? Did she like to draw? Did anyone tell her she was wanted? Traffic thickened near DC, and my heart hammered so loudly I kept checking the speedometer, certain the car heard me. I pulled over once to breathe and to text Paige a single word Richmond, so somebody would know where I was if hope turned out to be a cliff. By the last hour, I drove in silence, palms open on the wheel, whispering a grandmother's prayer, let it be her. Lauren met me at the door of a Victorian that had been drafted into service. High ceilings, tired paint, a playground out back where the swing chains squeaked in the heat. She led me through hallways that smelled like bleach and crayons, then out into a yard where children clustered in easy clumps, gravity, organized by games. Off to the side on a bench near the fence sat a small girl with her shoulders curved and hands quiet in her lap. She watched the others the way people watch aquariums, interested, removed, accustomed to glass. Lauren touched my sleeve and pointed soft as a prayer. I stood there a moment to steady my face. I didn't want to arrive like a storm. A basketball thumped. Someone shouted. The girl didn't turn. I remembered Kara's rules. Get the eyes, stay in the light, move slow. I asked Lauren for permission with a look. She nodded. The distance between us felt like a decade and a hallway. I started walking, slowly, carefully toward her. I approached from the front so she could see me coming. The sun threw shadows from the fence, so I stepped into the open and waited until her eyes flicked up. I lifted my hand and signed hello, exaggerating a little, so nerves wouldn't steal clarity. She watched my face like it held subtitles. I pointed to my chest and signed my name slowly, then voiced it once because Kara taught me to choose, and stick with it. She answered in small, careful signs, the way you might tiptoe across a new floor. Her name, the one they used here, was different than the one I said to God at night, but it was hers now, and I honored it. I asked if I could sit. She nodded without moving her hands. We sat with space between us, the kind you give someone who has had too many aserikan people come too close. I told her I was happy to meet her. I meant it with my whole life that day. I kept my eyes on her face, letting the moment breathe, and then she shifted on the bench, and her collar slipped just enough for me to see the small mark on her left shoulder. A comma inked by biology identical to the one my son had worn since birth. Not a dot, not a smudge, curved, precise, the family's quiet signature. Heat rushed my neck, and I had to fix my gaze on the safe horizon of the fence to steady myself. I didn't reach for her. I didn't gasp. I asked her if she liked the swings. She shrugged, then signed, maybe, then asked my name again to make sure she had it right. I gave it slower and added nice to meet you this time, careful with the palm orientation. She copied the motion, tiny and perfect. The mark burned in my peripheral vision, like a lighthouse. It wasn't proof, not yet, but it was a star that had found its constellation, and I was its astonished witness. Lauren brought us inside slowly, as if sudden movement might break something fragile we couldn't afford to replace. In her office, she opened a beige folder that looked worn from being not read. The intake sheet listed a birth year, not a date, a county, not a hospital. No birth name, only the one assigned here. Under medical notes, failed newborn hearing screen, likely bilateral hearing loss. A line farther down, temporary foster placement, disrupted at 6 months. There was a photocopy of a transfer form with a blacked-out agency line and a hand-scrawled note, Origin, Connecticut. I touched the edge of the paper because touching proof is a way of staying upright. Lauren watched my hands and said she was sorry the record was so thin. Some infants arrive like rumors. She said the girl had learned a little sign, then plateaued for lack of teachers. I asked whether anyone had ever come for her. Lauren looked at me a long time and shook her head. I kept breathing anyway. We arranged the DNA test through a lawyer, so nothing could be dismissed as grandmotherly hysteria later. A nurse swabbed the inside of her cheek while I sat perfectly still and did not reach for her hand. The sample went into an envelope. The envelope went into a cooler. My heart went into a holding pattern. They told me results would take 3 days. I have lived through long nights, but those days taught me something new about time, how it stretches when a future is deciding whether to arrive. I kept myself moving like a person, convincing a fainting friend to stay upright laundry lists, walking the block practicing signs I already knew by heart. At night, I lay on a sofa that smelled like old upholstery and prayed practical prayers, keep her safe, guard her sleep, plant kindness nearby. I did not bargain. I did not bribe the heavens. I just asked to be brave enough for either answer, and then asked again until morning finally believed me back. The lawyer opened the envelope the way you open a door you already know leads home. He didn't make us wait for pageantry. He read the number out loud, and the room changed temperature 99.7%. My knees went unreliable, and my face dissolved. I put both hands over my mouth because all the sounds I had practiced not making wanted out at once. The lawyer kept talking about next steps and signatures and jurisdictions. But I was someplace weightless where 10 years were being rewound and retied to a single heartbeat. When I could stand upright again, I texted Paige one word found, and she sent back a waterfall of exclamation points and a photo of the sun over the Thames. Outside, the sky looked ordinary, a mercy I appreciated. I went to the car and cried until my ribs ached, then laughed because crying was finally allowed to be happiness. I whispered, "We did it," as if the little girl could hear hope through walls and answer me someday too. This time the machinery moved because enough people wanted it to. Lauren wrote a letter that read like a hand on the small of your back, steadying. The caseworker added her own, describing a child who stayed close to the fence and rarely expected kindness. My attorney said the file would be reviewed quickly. My background check came back clean enough to eat off. I flew to Virginia twice for home studies that asked whether my outlets had covers and my heart had stamina. I answered yes to both and meant it. A judge looked at us over reading glasses and asked the girl if she understood what adoption meant. She watched the interpreter and signed it means I get to leave. The clerk swallowed hard. Papers were signed, stamped, clipped together. I thanked everyone because gratitude is ballast. Outside the sun stood exactly where I'd left it 3 days earlier. I told the girl we were going home, and by home, I meant wherever she felt safe beside me. We flew the next week, 2 seats by the window, the world peeled back in layers of cloud. She pressed her forehead to the glass and watched the wing carve light. I signed small things, bathroom water hungry, and she nodded or shook her head, answering with the economy of someone who has learned that needs can be inconvenient. When she slept, I watched the rise and fall of her shoulders and imagined the weight of 12 years lifting molecule by molecule. A flight attendant handed her a pair of wings on a pin. She turned it over carefully, then tucked it into the pocket of her hoodie, like she wasn't sure presents stayed. When the captain announced London, I signed almost there. She looked at me, then at the clouds, then back at me, and rested her head on my arm. I kept still as prayer. We landed into gray weather and the particular brightness of a city that has never apologized for rain. We stepped into it together at last. Mira came by the apartment a day after we arrived, a whirlwind of checklists and gentleness. She walked the rooms with us and pointed to light bulbs that needed warming to the doorbell, that needed eyes as well as ears, to the hallways that would be friendlier with motion sensors. She talked smoke alarms that strobe phones that vibrate bedtime routines, that include charging devices and checking batteries like teeth. She reminded me that language lives best where faces are easy to read, so we moved lamps and chairs to pull brightness onto the places where we'd talk. She asked about school, about counseling, about how we'd handle the fallout when grief finally believed it was safe to show up. I answered honestly I would mess up, and I would repair. Mira nodded like I'd passed the test worth passing. By evening, there were sticky notes on switches and a new bell that flashed hello in blue. We stood under it and smiled like two conspirators who had changed the rules. Jamie arrived on a Tuesday with a backpack of visual games and a laugh that lived in his eyes. He was deaf and young enough to make courage look easy. At our kitchen table, he and the girl played Go Fish with vocabulary decks until both of them were cheating on purpose to force new signs into the room. He corrected my hand shapes without apology and praised my facial grammar when it finally matched my hands. One evening after Ella froze mid-sentence and shut down in that quiet way trauma prefers, Jamie signed to me, "Stop voicing. Give her a bath of language, not a drizzle. Let silence be the medium, not the subject." I swallowed my old habits and nodded. The next day, I signed and kept my mouth still. The apartment changed key. Comprehension came quicker. Frustration rose and fell without that extra static. We drew pictures when we needed nouns. We laughed with our shoulders. We learned to be fluent in presence before the verbs caught up. Trust does not shatter with noise. It hairline cracks in silence. In those early weeks, Ella ate like the plate might be reclaimed, shoulders hunched, eyes measuring distance to the door. She woke before dawn, fully dressed, perched on the edge of her bed, as if any comfort were temporary. I learned to narrate the day on my hands' breakfast. School home dinner, sleep repeat. The visual doorbell flashed friendly blue, and every morning I made a ritual of ringing it for her, then opening my arms the way a porch light opens night. I set timers she could see. I labeled drawers. I knocked before entering her room, waited for her eyes, then signed good morning until the phrase looked lived in. When we walked the neighborhood, I stayed to her left, so she could watch my face without craning. At grocery checkout, I let her place the basket on the belt and choose the bread. Safety is a choreography. My job was learning the steps day after day without exceptions. At the new school intake, felt like building a bridge, while already walking across it. An interpreter joined us, but the principal and deaf program lead preferred to sign directly eyes kind pace patient. The assessment showed a canyon. Ella read like a second grader, wrote like a careful beginner, and carried a backpack full of missing nouns. We built an IEP heavy on ASL immersion visual phonics math through manipulative science with hands-on labs. Twice a week, she met a counselor who specialized in adoption trauma. They played card games to trick the truth into showing up. I learned to send emails ahead, explaining triggers, and asking teachers to face the light. Some days, Ella returned, bristled with effort, language sore, the way legs ache after stairs. Other days, she walked to the car, smiling without showing teeth. Which is how some victories look. The school bus of my childhood carried noise. Hers carried quiet information, fast and vivid. Slowly, her world began to widen and make room for believing. It happened over fractions, as ordinary as spilled milk and twice as messy. The numbers stacked wrong, the page blurred, and Ella's hands stopped mid-air like birds startled in flight. Then the sound came raw low, unfamiliar to both of us, and the book hit the floor, followed by her pencil case and every certainty I'd arranged that day. I made the rookie mistake of speaking while signing. Her face shuddered. I remembered Jamie's instruction and closed my mouth. I knelt to her level, let my breath slow, and signed 3 sentences I had been practicing for a moment like this. I am here. I am not leaving, you are safe. She sobbed the way an old house settles loudly, then softer. I did not reach until she leaned. We sat on the kitchen tile, counting breaths together, watching the storm spend itself. Later, the counselor named it abandonment alarm, easily triggered, soothed by consistency. I wrote it on a sticky note and taped it to my heart and checked it daily. Zoe arrived like weather that refuses to read the forecast. She was a classmate with fearless eyebrows and a talent for ignoring no. At lunch, she sat across from Ella, day after day, narrating jokes in big, generous signs until Ella's mouth remembered how to curve. When the drama club needed another pair of hands for a signed poetry program, Zoe tugged Ella along, promising she could work backstage. By the third rehearsal, Ella was on stage, shaping verses with her palms while light pooled around her. I cried the way mothers do, quietly and completely from the third row. Poetry in ASL is a choreography of eyebrow and breath. Ella learned where to plant pauses like stepping stones. Opening night, Zoe missed a cue on purpose, to force Ella into a solo she was ready for and afraid of. The room held its breath. Ella's story lifted, precise and luminous. Applause is loud even without sound. It shakes the ribs and rearranges shame and leaves courage sitting beside you. One evening after dishes and before homework, Ella asked for the long version. We sat on the couch with the lights adjusted to flatter our faces, and I told it all Berlin, to Greenwich the closed file, the first pin, the investigators who vanished like weather, the map that grew into a forest the day in Richmond when a small shoulder offered its comma to the sun. I told her about Kara and Rita and Lauren and the strangers who pressed casseroles into my bewildered hands. I told her about the word defective and how I set it down day after day until it lost its teeth. She listened with her whole body correcting my clumsy syntax without interrupting the truth. When I finished, she signed slowly. They were wrong. I am not broken. The sentence hung in the air like a bell whose note cleans a room. I nodded and signed back. You are loved. You always were. Now you know. Keep that sentence near your morning and night. The email arrived on an ordinary Tuesday subject line, tidy as a Thai family. I stared at my son's name until the screen felt hot, then clicked. He wrote about time and regret, about an adopted son named Gabe, who was 18 now, and asking about grandparents. He didn't mention the girl they'd relinquished at 5 days or the word that exiled her. He asked to meet to talk to Try. I read it twice, then again out loud to the quiet room, as if the air might offer counsel. My heart did two things at once, slammed shut, like a car door and opened like a window in July. I wanted to delete it, and I wanted to ask what took you so long until the question lost its sting. Instead, I called Ella into the light and let her read. She watched my face while her hands stayed very still. Then she signed. What do you want? I answered honestly, I don't know, but I'll choose carefully first. We sat at the table with tea and paper between us, like a treaty waiting for ink. We made rules meet on neutral ground, leave if respect. Thins protect Ella's privacy, reveal nothing we aren't ready to hold afterward. I would write back and say we were visiting Connecticut for a short stay. Ella touched my wrist and signed, I'm coming. I tried to say she didn't owe me that. She replied with a small, stubborn smile that looked like mine. Back up, she signed, and made the sign bigger, as if to humor me. We practiced our cover, my adopted daughter from London, a family we built on purpose. It wasn't even a lie. I booked flights and a rental car that could carry both courage and luggage. That night, I lay awake listening to London's rain and promised myself I would not go unarmed. I would carry boundaries, sharper than any apology. In the morning, I pressed send. Connecticut answered within the hour. Dinner tomorrow, 6 Greenwich Avenue, confirmed. He stood behind them like hope, arriving late, but in the right suit. When we were introduced, he said Grandma with a softness that surprised me and made me wary in equal measure. Then he turned to Ella, lifted his hands, and signed, Hello, nice to meet you, in shapes that were rusty but respectful. Ella answered, and something eased between them, like a held breath exhaled. At dinner, he asked real questions about her school, about what made math easier, about the best seat for light in a classroom. He told us he'd studied ASL in high school for a girl named Hannah, and then blushed because the sentence told on him. He laughed at himself without bitterness. He listened, which is rarer than charisma and twice as binding. I watched Ella choose where to sit near him. I watched him shift so she could see his face. Politeness can be taught. Kindness often reveals itself. His did steadily like a lamp finding power and staying lit after we left. The second meeting happened at my place, where I could measure their edges against familiar walls. Their clothes whispered yesterday's money. The watch that once bragged now merely kept time. They complimented the house too eagerly and asked twice about the square footage, as if approval might earn them a room. When I asked about work, Drew offered a blur of consulting and opportunities in motion, the kind of answer that wants to be believed without details. Vivian smiled thinly and redirected toward Gabe's classes. Gabe brought grocery store flowers for Ella and me and signed "Sorry, I'm late" because the bus had run slow. They arrived by rideshare, which told a story the car in their photos used to tell. I filed it in the cabinet, marked "Something's off." Still, I set out tea and cake and let the afternoon proceed like we were auditioning for normal. Outside, the hedges minded their manners. Inside, I watched the seams begin to show quiet, but undeniable like fabric, stressed at hidden hems. On a Thursday, Gabe arrived alone, the way confessions prefer to travel. He and Ella sat on the garden bench, shoulders close, hands moving faster than usual. From the window, I saw her glance at me and sign, "Wait." When they finally came in, Gabe's eyes were red. He asked to talk somewhere private, so we sat in the study that had learned to hold heavy words. He told us the truth, flat as a ledger. Vivian's father had been arrested on fraud charges. The government had taken everything that wasn't nailed down, and some that was. Connections dissolved like sugar in hot tea. They'd downsized twice and were staring at bankruptcy. The email, the dinners, the compliments part, remorse part survival. They hoped I would feel called to rescue what pride wouldn't let them name. Gabe said he hated being part of it, that he'd come today to stop being a tool. I believed him. Ella reached for his hand. He didn't pull away, and relief found his shoulders briefly. In the quiet that followed responsibility, changed chairs. I told Gabe there was more truth to carry, and asked if he felt steady enough. He nodded and sat forward. I began with the simplest facts: the hospital screening, the closed adoption, the 5 days that rearranged a family. Then I lifted the heavier sentence with both hands. The girl your parents relinquished, she is here. Ella was watching him. Her face calm, the way lakes look calm over deep water. She signed and spoke together, generous to comprehension. I am their biological daughter. The room did not move, but everything in it shifted. Gabe's mouth opened, then closed. Then he pressed his fist against his sternum, as if to keep his heart from falling out. He asked one question. "Are you sure?" And I answered with the birthmark, the timeline, the DNA, and the 12 years an orphanage held. He exhaled like a person surfacing. I saw anger, grief, and clarity take turns. He reached for Ella, and she let him without flinching. He asked it like a person choosing oxygen. Could I live here? I reminded him he was 18 and could choose where his feet slept. He nodded, but the question under his question was permission to belong without auditioning. I said yes tonight and meant it with my whole house. We texted his parents that he was safe and staying with me. He drafted the message and I approved the boundaries. Ella signed "Welcome home" with a gravity that made me cry later in the pantry. I showed him the guest room and the drawer with extra chargers, the shelf with spare towels, the key on a ribbon, so he would hear it against the door and trust he had the right to turn it. We made simple rules. Lights out by kindness, not by fear. Say where you're going. Take what you need and replace what you can. He called me Grandma without ceremony and set his backpack down like a flag. The house exhaled. So did I. I sent the email that afternoon with the subject line I chose carefully, Saturday 7. Dinner here. Dinner. There is something we need to discuss. No apologies, no preamble. Within the hour, a reply arrived wrapped in relief. They didn't bother to disguise. We would love to, he wrote. Thank you, Mom. See you then. I could hear the script lining up in his head. Remorse, nostalgia, a pivot to need. I told Ella and Gabe we had 3 days to steady our hearts. We made a list on the back of an envelope, documents ready, boundaries rehearsed, exits clear. I pulled the manila folder from the safe. DNA results, the photo of the birthmark taken in daylight, the timeline page with dates double-checked. We cooked simple food and cleaned the rooms as if dignity could be dusted onto baseboards. When I set the table, I counted plates like counting votes. The house felt like a courthouse and a sanctuary both. I intended it to be the last time we met on old terms. We built the evening like a play whose ending we already knew. China that had waited too long for used napkins, ironed flat a roast that perfumed the house with patience, candles low enough to flatter truth. I set 3 places on one side of the table and 2 on the other so the geometry would keep us allied. Music played soft, nothing sentimental. When the bell rang, I let it echo once before opening the door. They had dressed to be persuasive. The clothes remembered money even if the bank account didn't. Compliments spilled in the foyer, then died of natural causes in the dining room. I poured wine for everyone who wanted it, and water for the rest. We started with salad with small talk that did not pretend to be anything else. I asked after health, and he answered with adjectives. She smiled like a person holding a porcelain cup, too hot to touch. I waited until the table forgot to perform, then I took the floor. I began with gratitude, because it steadies my hands. Thank you for coming. We do, in fact, have something to discuss. I said Ella's name and watched their eyes land on her, the way tourists land on a landmark from a distance with entitlement. I kept my voice level. When I brought my daughter home from Virginia, I called her adopted because that's what the paperwork said. It is not the whole truth. Ella is not just a child I found. She is the child you relinquished at 5 days after a failed newborn hearing screen. I let the sentence live in the air while I breathed through the part of me that wanted to shout. Ella watched their faces unblinking. I described the hospital test, the closed file, the decade of search that followed. I did not apologize for surviving long enough to complete it. Their forks paused mid-air, which is how guilt freezes when it has not practiced contrition. I slid the manila folder nearer, but did not open it yet. Evidence isn't a weapon, it is a mirror. I opened the folder and placed the DNA report where they could read the numbers without arguing with adjectives 99, 7%. Next, the photograph, Ella's left shoulder, in daylight, the comma-shaped birthmark, as unmistakable as a signature you've seen since childhood. Then the timeline is spare, accounting no lawyer, would dismiss birth in Connecticut, relinquishment at 5 days, disrupted foster placement transfer out of state, 12 years of orphanage records, a judge's stamp with today's date. I kept my hands still. I wanted the paper to do the shaking. Vivian reached for the report with fingers that trembled anyway. Drew stared at the photo like it might blur if he waited it out. Ella did not try to make them comfortable. I pointed to the chair backs and said quietly that they could sit with this or stand. Running was not on the menu. The room held, so did we. Numbers do not negotiate, neither does a birthmark. Gabe stood then because some truths require elevation. He set both palms on the table the way a person steadying a boat does and looked directly at them. He told them he wouldn't carry their story any further. He explained how they had coached him before that first dinner, what to call me, which memories to showcase, which to misplace. He described the phone calls, rehearsing lines about reconciliation, while spreadsheets bled. He said the word prison without flinching, naming the grandfather. Neither of them had named the charges that vacuumed their accounts and their alibis. He pointed out their ride shares and their suddenly modest jewelry, not to humiliate, but to end pretense. Then he turned to me and said he was sorry for being the delivery system for their need. I told him he was 18 and forgiven, and that accountability and guilt are not synonyms. He nodded and sat shoulders squared differently, as if the chair believed him now. Silence recalibrated around us. Ella spoke next with her hands and her voice together, because some doors require 2 keys. She looked at them like adults, and at herself like a child who needed guarding, and signed slowly so no one could claim confusion. Don't say my name. You gave up the right to it. She told them about 12 years of being almost chosen, about the way staff learned not to promise about learning. Just enough language to ask simple questions, and not enough to ask the big ones. She didn't dramatize. She inventoried. She said she ate fast because hunger had been a familiar visitor. She said she woke dressed because people leave. She said the word defective as if laying it on the table for disposal. Then she signed the sentence we had practiced for when old power tried a new angle. My boundary is this. You do not get to enter my life, not now, maybe not ever. She finished with her hands open, then folded them, and the room finally understood the cost. Karma doesn't make speeches, it marks attendance. I looked at the 2 people who once called themselves my child and his wife, and said the line that had been waiting since the doorbell. You lost both of your children tonight. Not by accident, not by theft, but by the arithmetic of your choices. You relinquished a baby for being deaf, and the son you kept has chosen to leave rather than make a home out of your denial. I did not relish the sentence. I delivered it like medicine that stings before it heals. I reminded them we would not be financing their recovery, their reputation, or their reruns. I told them if they contacted us outside of counsel, the police would learn the parts of this story they had omitted from their own summaries. I stood, and so did Ella and Gabe, not dramatic, simply done. I walked them to the door. Drew said Mom once softly. I said goodnight, Christopher, and closed what needed closing. The latch did not echo, it simply held. The house hummed after. We didn't speak for several minutes. We just moved in the kitchen like boats in a harbor, learning their water again. I washed the good china that finally felt used for something good. Ella dried stacking plates with a care that made new rituals out of old objects. Gabe wiped the table and gathered the evidence back into the folder, then handed it to me like a soldier returning a flag. When the counters were clear, we stood in a triangle that slowly became a circle and then an embrace. No speeches. Our breathing found the same tempo. I felt Ella's forehead against my shoulder, and Gabe's hand a careful weight between my shoulder blades. When we let go, we made tea too late for caffeine to be wise, and drank it anyway. I sent one email to Paige, all done. Then I turned off the dining room light last, and the darkness settled without fear. Sleep, when it came, was clean. London dawned as if it had been waiting with gentle hands. Routines arrived like small boats, carrying us across mornings, doorbell, flash breakfast, signs a scramble for backpacks that felt ordinary and therefore miraculous. Gabe practiced ASL with Ella over toast. Stumbling into jokes that needed no sound, he enrolled in counseling to unlearn obligation, masquerading as love. Ella returned to school with a spine I recognized. She waved to Zoe with the confidence of someone who knows where to sit. I found a rhythm that honored their separate gravity rides, paperwork dinners that did not need to impress anyone. On Sundays, we walked under improbable blue and named clouds in 3 languages, English, ASL, and the private one families invent. Sometimes grief visited, and we set an extra place. Sometimes joy came early, and we ate dessert first. I watched them text each other from across the room and decided not to tease. Language, any language, is a victory. Our house developed the sound of quiet belonging. Next steps stopped looking like cliffs and started looking like stairs. Gabe received his acceptance letter from University College London Social Work with a scholarship pieced together from merit essays and the kind of recommendation letters that can only be written by people who have watched you choose right when easy asked louder. Ella's progress meeting felt like spring reading. Lept Math stopped snarling, and her drama teacher used the word luminous without irony. Hannah texted Gabe after he sent a long, honest apology that did not ask for anything back. She wrote that healing is a marathon and sent him a photo of her dog. He grinned the way 18 does. We updated wills and passwords because love is also paperwork. We practiced holiday plans that did not rely on anyone's approval. Some afternoons we still sat very close for no reason. Other days they went out without me, and I learned to let happiness sound like my name. Called from the door at dusk, we're home. Here's what I learned at the end of all our doors and dinners. Forgiveness isn't a key you hand to people still jiggling your locks. It's a quiet decision to stop bleeding for their choices while keeping the porch light on for your own. I chose love, and love came with boundaries signed, clearly posted at eye level, enforced without drama. I love the child they abandoned and the young man they tried to use. I love the life we are building, where the doorbell flashes blue, where language arrives by hand, where a comma-shaped birthmark reads like survival, not shame. I do not hate the people who taught me these lessons. I simply won't let them rewrite our map or touch the silver rattle waiting for future hands. If it were you, would you forgive or close the door? Tell me below 1 for forgiveness, 2 for a firm goodbye. Me, I'm here, palms open, latch steady, loving forward and guarding the threshold. Comment and subscribe for the next chapter.